The Vienna S-Bahn Ring is a concept that has already been around for decades. The idea is to create a new circular S-Bahn service around the city, which would make use of already existing railway lines. When we look at other cities like Berlin, we can see that S-Bahn Ring lines can actually be very successful. But why did Vienna never make the S-Bahn Ring a reality? And is the S-Bahn Ring the solution that Vienna actually needs? These are some of the questions that I will be answering in today's video. The Vienna S-Bahn provides fast connections between Vienna and its surrounding towns. Currently, there are 10 S-Bahn lines in total. Two of these lines, the S45 and the S80, function as orbital lines around the city. There are also several railway lines that are only served by freight trains, like the Donau-Ufer-Bahn. In the past few decades, local politicians and citizen initiatives have often made proposals to make better use of these freight lines. This is where the idea of the S-Bahn Ring comes into place. The Ring Line would be a completely new service, combining parts of the existing S45, S80 and the Donau-Ufer-Bahn to a continuous ring line. But what are the anticipated benefits of this proposal? Well, on the one hand, it would enable faster and more convenient connections for people travelling across the city. Especially the western districts of Vienna would benefit, as it would be easier to travel to Vienna's two largest railway stations, Hauptbahnhof and Meidling. But also connections to the 22nd district would improve. At the same time, the existing public transport services would be less crowded. People would have the option to travel around the busy city centre rather than always just through it. If there is a disruption on the underground, people would have more alternatives, making the public transport network in Vienna more resilient. And last but not least, as most of the infrastructure is already here, the cost to build this wouldn't be ever so high. That being said, there are some things you would have to do, like building new stations and creating new connection tracks. Now, the concept of reactivating freight lines for passenger services is not new. As a matter of fact, Vienna has already done this once before. In one of my recent videos, I talked about the amazing success story of Vienna's S45 service. Do make sure you check out the video if you haven't done so yet. The Vororte-Linie is a line that was falling into decay after the Second World War, but was reactivated again in the 1980s. When the line was reopened, Vienna's mayor, Helmut Züg, already announced that it is his intention to expand the S45 further to Meidling in the next few years.
Anlässlich der Eröffnungsfeier in Heiligenstadt betonte Bürgermeister Helmut Züg die Bedeutung des Schnellbahnnetzes für den öffentlichen Verkehr der Bundeshauptstadt. Zugleich forderte Züg die Verlängerung der Vororte-Linie Richtung Süden nach Meidling. Verkehrsminister Rudolf Streicher bezeichnete diese Forderung als berechtigt, stellte aber fest, dass für diese Erweiterung noch keine Finanzierungsmöglichkeit bestehe.
So as we can see, plans to build a Vienna S-Bahn Ring have been around for a very long time. But why have they never been put into practice? Well, the thing is, for a long time, the city of Vienna had other priorities. The Vienna U-Bahn was long seen as the #1 mode of public transport to serve the continuously growing city. New extensions were opened every few years, and so it came that public spendings were prioritised towards the expansion of the U-Bahn rather than spending them on projects like the S-Bahn Ring. Now, the U-Bahn is definitely one of the main contributors of how Vienna's public transport system has become so successful. But at the same time, I feel that around the early 2000s, the potential of the S-Bahn in Vienna was somewhat overlooked. For a long time, the S-Bahn had mostly outdated rolling stock, with no step-free access, and frequencies on many lines were relatively low. Meanwhile, the U-Bahn was fast, accessible, and frequent. And this is rather interesting, because when you look at other cities in, say, Germany, like Berlin, Hamburg, or Munich, you will see that there, the S-Bahn and the U-Bahn were developed as equal systems that complemented each other, and you didn't have the feeling that they tried to prioritize one system over the other. However, one has to say that in the last 10 years, things have changed in Vienna, and the S-Bahn has experienced somewhat of a revival. On the one hand, you now have new rolling stock that is more accessible, and also there are numerous infrastructure upgrades taking place. But what about the S-Bahn Ring? Well, in 2020, Austria's new Liberal Party NEOS, who then became part of the city government, commissioned a feasibility study for the S-Bahn Ring. 3 years later, in 2023, the results of this study were published. And the outcome was an S-Bahn Ring is feasible. However, there's a catch, because the solution they propose in the study isn't actually a continuous S-Bahn Ring service. More rather, it's an enhancement of the already existing lines S45 and S80, and because the two lines then meet up again at 2 points, they call this solution a S-Bahn Ring. But to be honest, it's not really a proper ring. But how did they come to the conclusion that this is the most viable option? Well, one of the main problems with the continuous ring line is the fact that it would have to share its infrastructure with lots of other types of train services, such as freight trains, intercity trains, as well as empty trains that run to and from their parking spots. Whenever you try to implement a continuous ring line, other S-Bahn lines, like the S80, would have to be reduced. By reducing existing services like the S80, you would actually lose more passengers than you would gain through a new S-Bahn ring. This is a significant difference to the S-Bahn Ring in Berlin that I mentioned earlier. In Berlin, the S-Bahn Ring runs completely separate from all other types of long-distance train services. On several sections, you even have a third and fourth track for the regional and long-distance trains. What's more, the ring line in Berlin has existed since 1877, long before the city has expanded to the size it has today. It's a historical part of the city's structure and has evolved over time. So what I'm trying to say is, the situation in Berlin can't be transferred to Vienna one-to-one, because the situation in the two cities is rather different. Another reason why the study claims that the S-Bahn Ring wouldn't be beneficial is that journey times wouldn't actually be any shorter than when you use other forms of transport, like the tram or the underground. And while this might be true in some cases, because you would be travelling the long way round, as opposed to travelling directly through the city, I think that this argument is somewhat short-sighted. Because yes, in some cases it might be slightly faster to travel directly through the city. But I think that subjectively, a lot of people would feel that it's faster using the S-Bahn Ring, because the S-Bahn in Vienna has one considerable advantage over the U-Bahn, and that is comfort. S-Bahn trains in Vienna have very high comfort standards. You have very comfortable seats, many other features like tables, bicycle spaces, room to store your luggage, and so on and so forth. And these are all things that you don't really have when you use the underground or the tram. And especially for people travelling to larger train stations, like Hauptbahnhof, who often have lots of luggage with them, this could be a major benefit. Now, the solution they presented in the study is not bad. I think it's positive to say that things are changing, things are evolving, and they will be enhancing the existing services. But at the same time, I do think it's a shame that they don't have this through connection from the Vorortlinie to Meidling and Hauptbahnhof, because this would have been one of the main benefits of this S-Bahn Ring. I also wonder why they didn't examine more alternative solutions in the study. For example, one variant which I think could have been feasible would be to connect the ring on one side but leave the ring separated on the other. The S80, rather than running to Hütteldorf, would run via Penzing along the Vorortlinie to Handelsgeh. This way, the S80 would have a direct connection to Meidling and Hauptbahnhof for a lot more people than when it only serves Hütteldorf. And while I think this would be a better solution than the one that is proposed, I must sadly admit that it is probably too late, because the feasibility study has been published, nobody is questioning it, and I think the proposal that is in the feasibility study is what we are going to get. But nonetheless, it's food for thought. Do let me know in the comments what you think about my proposal. And by the way, if you want to find out more about the history of the Vienna S-Bahn, do check out my latest video that I did about the Vienna S45 service. In the video, I have lots of historic footage of how the line was reactivated in the 1980s, so do make sure you take a look at it, and I'll see you again in my next video.